Hi there, everyone, and welcome to Paper Wishes weekly webisodes. I'm Sara Newman, and I'm so happy you're joining me for this episode of Saturday with Sara. Well, today we're playing with fabulous stencils from our friends at Ciao. Now, if you are a stencil person like I am, you're really going to love the designs that we have for you today. And if you're new to stencils, well, I'm going to share with you 3 really simple and effective ways to use them with your card making. Now, the 4 designs that we have today, you can see them right here. We can take a look. Here is anemones, a really beautiful floral and geometric design. Then we have delicate with some really pretty swirls. This works beautifully for a reverse stenciling technique, which I'll show you. There's also rose bush. As you can imagine, this is going to be a beautiful background. And the same with the stencil called Harmony. This also makes a wonderful background and border element too. Now, each of these stencils is 5 inches by 8 inches, so they're ideal for use on lots of different kinds of paper crafts. They're made of a really sturdy plastic, so they can easily be cleaned up and used again and again. Now, I use most of my stencils with ink and also embossing powders, and today I'll share some fun techniques with a couple of demos plus projects to give you lots of ideas for adding pattern and color to your cards. As you can see, we have a lot to explore today, and I'm so glad that you're here. Come play with us. One of my favorite ways to use a stencil is with stamping ink and a blending tool. Now, this is how I've created the background of my card here. Now, for this card, I'm using the Harmony stencil, which you can see here, along with Hunky Dory's wonderful dye-based inks. So let's take a look at how easy this is to do. I'm using my blending brush here. There are lots of different options you can use for blending tools. This is one that I really happen to like. You'll notice I've also got some of my Hunky Dory low-tack tape, and I've got that securing my stencil down onto my white cardstock. I have 3 different shades of green here, all of these beautiful colors from Hunky Dory. I've got Lime Zest, Pear Green, and Shamrock, and I'm going to use all of these. But of course, this technique works whether you're using 1, 2, 3, or even more ink pad colors. Okay, so I'm also working onto my craft mat, and this is just going to help protect my work surface. So I've got my tape on here, got my cardstock ready to go. So I'm going to begin with the lightest of my 3 colors, which is the Lime Zest. So I'm going to begin here, then I'll add a bit of the pear, and then finish up with some of the Shamrock. Okay, I'm working with 1 blending brush here, so I'm going to use this throughout the whole process. And all I'm doing here is just applying the ink onto the blending brush itself. And then I'm going to come in here and add some of this color right through my stencil and onto my cardstock. So I'm working with some kind of a circular motion here, and I'm not applying this ink color all over. I'm just kind of going around the edges here, sort of a halo effect. And let's see, I'll move on to my pear green. I'm not cleaning my brush in between uses. I'm just going to add some more color right on top. That's why I'm starting with my lightest color, so that I don't contaminate or get that brush dirty. And I tend to have a couple of these brushes, and I use them. I'll use one in reserve for, say, greens. I'll have another one that's specifically red color or shades of red, and then I've got, another one for blue, and so on. Okay, now I'm going to come in with the Shamrock, which is the darkest color, and work this in here too. I'm using a fairly light pressure here. And of course that tape is really helping to keep everything in place, and so my stencil isn't sliding around. And this is a fun technique to use whether you're using shades of one color, like shades of green, shades of blue, or if you're going for a rainbow effect, you could also do that too. Really incorporate lots of colors. Okay, I'm going to go over this a little bit more here, blend out some of those areas here, and then let's take a look. So scoop my ink pads over. I'm going to pull off my tape here. And we can take a look. Let's see. I'm gonna have a tricky time getting this tape off this morning. Okay, here we go. And I do tend to reuse these little tape pieces too until they're just about completely out of commission. Okay, set that over here. And then let's pull this off and take a look. So you can see I've got lots of different shades of that beautiful green in here. Lots of fun, and it makes a beautiful, beautiful background. I love how delicate this stencil design is too, and yet how easily you can capture that detail in there. So lots of fun and a really simple way to use your stencils. So back to my card, once I've got the background done, I can trim it down and mount it onto the front of my card. Now in this case, I also added some gold metallic embossing powder around the edge before I glued this onto the front of my card. Now I'd covered my card front with this light green cardstock here too. And the cardstock and the pattern paper that I'm using on this card and for all of the projects in today's webisode are from the Sweet Pea collection. So here I have a patterned paper oval. I've die cut that to create a focal with these beautiful butterflies. Now the butterflies come from two places. The small butterflies that you see here are dazzles, and the larger one is from the Floral Fantasy Foiled Fancies collection. Ooh, I have to say that one slowly. Now I've done a bit of altering to this embellishment, so I wanted to show that to you too. So I've got a couple of these foiled fancies, and they come on a sheet. There are lots of different sets, and you can just snip them apart. Just use some scissors to snip in between, and you can trim out whichever elements you want to work with. So I'm going to pop this up onto some white paper so that you can see this. Here's just one of these beautiful swirls. Now I can use this as is. I think it's really pretty. I can also alter it with a little bit of sanding. So I've got a sanding tool here, and I'm just going to gently sand this off. And when I do this, it's going to remove the gold foiling from the raised embossed detail, and it allows the silver to show through. Now you can also do stamping on here. You can add some paint and maybe really give them a weathered and distressed look. So much that you can do with these. These are a really fun embellishment to use. So here's my swirl with some of that gold foiling removed, and that's going to give me just a beautiful gold and silver effect. Really pretty and super simple to do too. Okay, so back to my card. I've got these elements arranged on my die cut oval. I've also added some diamond sparkles from Hunky Dory on the butterfly center, and that just creates a little bit more dimension on there. Add some polish to this, and super simple to pop on there as well. I also have some florets from 49 and Market as accents on my sentiment with my dazzle here too. So there's a lot going on. And then for the card inside, I have some more of my stenciled paper, and I have a die cut from the Sweet Pea collection, plus some more altered butterflies. With this project, I wanted to show you a simple way to use that same ink blending stenciling technique, but onto pattern paper instead of plain cardstock. So for my tag in a bag project, I'm using a really fun pink design from the Sweet Pea collection, and I've layered that with the Rosebush stencil using my blending brush and hot pink ink. So this is the same kind of dye-based ink here, same type of blending tool, and exactly the same process as before, just combining two pattern designs. So I'm going to move aside these things, and we can take a closer look at these two patterns. I have a little tip to share. So if you are stenciling onto a pattern paper that has a geometric design, like stripes or checks like this one does, I suggest you opt for a floral stencil to layer on top. Now, if you're using a geometric stencil, maybe your stencil has stripes or checks on it, then I would suggest combining that on a floral patterned background paper. This just creates a really nice visual balance. Okay, I'm going to bring back in my tag in a bag so we can take another look at this. Once I've stenciled my paper, I use the tag in a bag die, and I know you know how much I love using this die. It's one of my favorites. So you get the bag shape and you also get the tag shape. So the two of them, simply fold up that bag and you have a really fun project here. So I've used this with my stenciled background paper, and I've embellished this with one of the foiled fancies. This is from the Songbirds Foiled Fancies collection. And I have a butterfly from the Butterfly Dazzles stickers set. Now on the front here, I have a little message from the Tiny Words and Phrases Dazzles, and I've used those also on the tag that I've got just inside here. Okay, I've got another way to show you how to use this very same stencil for a completely different look using embossing powder. On this card background, I'm using the same rosebush stencil that I used on the Tag in a Bag project, but it's giving us a completely different look. And you can see here I've got those beautiful roses stenciled on here, but I'm using a combination of silver and gold metallic. And that's going to give me a really pretty vintage, distressed, kind of a weathered effect. And of course, I'm able to get the best of both worlds between a silver and a gold, which ties in really nicely with the sanding on this little birdie that I've got here. So let's take a look at the process, and you can see how simple it is to do. Now, a couple of supplies that I have on hand. Of course, I've got my stencil secured onto my white cardstock using some of that hunky-dory tape. And what I'm going to do is actually add a little bit more tape on either side here to make sure that this is really secured in place, so nothing is going to be moving. Now the reason for that is because when I'm using my pigment ink, I'm going to simply press it through the stencil onto the paper. And because this is a juicy pigment ink pad, it has a tendency to lift up the stencil a little bit with it. So I don't want that to happen. And then I'm also using my embossing powder here. Now this is the Aged Champagne embossing powder from the Encrusted Jewel set from Stampendous. And the combination of these is going to give me my beautiful gold and silver effect. Another thing that I have to have on hand, of course, is a piece of scrap paper so that I can funnel my embossing powder back into my jar when I'm done. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to simply take my ink pad, and you can see that raised ink pad bed on there. That's going to make it a lot easier for me to get my ink through the stencil and onto my paper. So you can see maybe a little bit that when I'm pressing this, it is tending to lift up that stencil just a little bit, which is why it's good to have a bit of extra tape just to secure things. And I'm not squashing it through, but it will take some firm pressure to make sure that that ink is going through the stencil. So pressing this along here, and may take a couple of rounds, a couple of go rounds, but you'll definitely see where the ink is going through here. Okay, so now what I can do is lift this up, and because I'm working with a pigment ink pad, I don't have to rush. I can go at a slightly slower pace, so that's not going to dry immediately. Okay, so I'm just going to lift this up, and there we can see that beautiful silver stenciling on here. Now I could leave this as is because this already looks really pretty, but of course I want to add in something else. So let me get my scrap paper here and my embossing powder. And I'm just going to tap this on here, and I'm kind of spot spattering on here. I want to make sure that I'm not covering the entire piece, but I'm just tapping this on in various areas. And of course, this technique would work beautifully with any color combination. So you can do metallics, but you could also do any color of pigment ink pad and any color of embossing powder. So there you can see I've got just some of those areas where that embossing powder has stuck. And I'm just going to tap this off, and then I can do my heat setting. So I'm returning my embossing powder back into the jar here, and then of course, very important, put the lid on the jar. And then I can go ahead and heat set this. And if you'll give me a second, I'll heat set this and we can take a look at the finished result. All right, I think we have heat set all of that embossing powder, and you can see the beautiful effect that you can get combining those two inks, the ink and the embossing powder, those two elements. It just creates a really pretty effect. And I love also how crisp and clean that stenciling is on there. That's just really wonderful. Okay, and then I have my piece all ready to trim down and use on the front of my card. Now in this case, I've inked around the outside edge of this piece and then added some gold embossing around the edges as well. So that's going to give me a little bit extra depth and dimension here. It creates a really polished, finished effect. And of course, I've got my green cardstocks here on the front of my card. And for my card focal, I have a nested scalloped circle and some leaves that have been die cut from the Leaves and Stems die set. I also added this really pretty sanded bird from the Songbird Foiled Fancy set and another butterfly dazzle. Then on the card inside, I have some more of that stenciled paper. I've got a big butterfly dazzle and a script dazzle to complete it. Now the butterfly stickers and on the inside and on the outside, these are from the Gilded Butterfly Dazzles set. So you've got small and you've got large, a really beautiful combination. And again, a fun way to work in some of those metallic colors. All right, I've got another card that I want to show you here too. Now, so far we've been using the stencil designs as quite large elements on our card, backgrounds and so on. You can also use just portions of the designs here too. So I've done that here with the anemones stencil, and you can see you've got lots of elements on here that you can isolate and just stencil a portion of this. And what I've done here is simply stenciled this and then die cut it into an oval shape. So I've used the stencil in the same way that we just looked at, except I've used regular plain embossing ink. So I've used the Wow embossing ink pad. And then I have used the azalea color from the Park Floral Trio from Wow Embossing. Now this is a special embossing powder too because it also has kind of a variegated effect. So you can see that there are lots of different colors in here, which is also going to give you a really pretty look when you do your stenciling. So exactly the same process we just saw. Press your ink pad through the stencil and then use that embossing powder to create your colored effect on here. So really versatile. I love this about this technique. Simple to do. So once I heat set this, I used an oval cutting die to create the layered card focal. And I've combined the stenciled piece with regular cardstock. You can see that pink on here. I've got some white vellum under here. And then I also have some cardstock covered with the clear glitter acetate. And this comes on sheets like so. And it's adhesive, which means that you can cover your cardstock with this. You can see it just peels off like so. And then you can do your die cutting, which is really wonderful. It gives some nice sparkle on here. I've got a foiled fancy swirl from the Mystic Garden set, plus butterflies and a tiny dazzle word. Then on the card inside, I have a floral fantasy fancy and script dazzle. We're going to go back to our dye-based ink pads for our final card project, which uses a reverse stenciling technique. So you can see here on the front of my card that I've used the delicate stencil, but the color is not going through the stencil shape. Rather, I've got the reverse of the design printed on here. So the reverse stenciling technique. This is a really fun mixed media process and one that's really easy to do. And a great way to utilize your stencils. You kind of get two looks from one stencil on many designs. And it's also a fun way to make use of your dye-based ink pads. So let's take a look at this. I'll move aside my card and you can see my beautiful stencil design here. I'm going to be working with the orchid color today. And I'm just going to pop this onto my piece of scrap paper. So it's really important for this technique that you're using a dye-based ink pad rather than a pigment ink or a solvent ink, because dye-based ink pads react with water, and we're going to be using water to create our effect. So what I'm going to do is just take my ink pad, and I'm applying the ink onto the stencil. So in this case, I will be going through the stencil onto my scrap paper, that's fine, but I'm not trying to create a design on my backing paper. That will just be an added bonus. I just want to make sure that I'm getting ink all over on the plastic of my stencil. So this is a technique that works beautifully with stencils that have a lot of plastic area. Those with really fine designs tend to be a little bit trickier. Okay, so you can see I've got all of my inking on here. I've got my bonus sheet as well. I'm just going to flip this over here. And the next thing I want to do is add some water. So I'm just going to give a couple of quick spritzes with my mister bottle. Now every mister bottle behaves a little bit differently. You may have discovered that. So you can get some very different looks. So what I'm going to do is try and add more water in one section and a little bit less in another section, and you can kind of see what we might end up with. So I'm just going to give a couple of mists here, and let me get another piece of scrap paper and pop that down. And I'm going to take a piece of white cardstock, and then I'm just going to place this right on top and smooth this down. So I want to make sure that that cardstock comes in contact with the stencil without things kind of sliding around. So I'm holding it down with one hand and smoothing with the other. And then we're going to lift this up, and there you go. So I've got the reverse of the design. And you can see the areas where I have more water, and you can see the areas where it's a bit crisper, so there was less water on there. So this may be a technique that you want to experiment with a little bit, depending of course on your particular mister bottle, as well as how much you're adding in each area of the design. So you can get some really fun looks. So you can see here on my card that I really utilized a lot of those varied areas. I like having the combination of both really fine detail as well as some a little bit blurrier, I guess you would say. So then for my card front, I've simply trimmed this down and added it as my background on here with some of the pink cardstock from the Sweet Pea collection. Then for my card focal, I've used the mannequin and the wings images from the Floral Fantasy Foiled Fancies set. I've sanded them and accented this with a floret. The body of the mannequin is up on foam tape for a little bit more dimension. And then the rest of the card is really simple with just a script dazzle down at the bottom. Then for the card inside, I have the same reverse stenciling technique, but on colored cardstock. Plus I've got another fancy and some tiny dazzles. And that is our final card project for the day today. So a big thank you to our friends at Ciao for these fantastic and versatile stencils. And a special thanks to you for joining me today. We're just really glad that you're here, and it's been so much fun to share these designs with you. We're just happy that you're a part of our Paper Wishes family. Please feel free to leave a comment. We love to hear what you think. And each item can be purchased separately, and you can also see them below. However, we bundled them into a creative money saver just for you. For the money saver, just see the webisode on paperwishes.com. And if you're watching us on YouTube, have a look in the description box below this video. You'll find a link that will take you to our Paper Wishes webisodes page, and you can see everything I just mentioned. If you enjoyed our video today, we'd really appreciate a thumbs up. It helps people to find our channel. And don't forget to subscribe. We create 3 to 5 videos each week, so there's always something fun to inspire your creative spirit.